Do the sex.
Today's Locker Room Talk and Chats topic is Soccer Moms and Slaves, a look at tOuch Kink, Kinktober's must-watch documentary. Kinktober, Locktober is upon us, and as my longtime listeners know, it's a hot time in the locker room. Over the past 3.5 years, I have created a suite of episodes that cover everything from male chastity to the praise kink to cock and ball torture. And I will be sending out these episodes to you all month long. You can scroll down and subscribe to my e-newsletter or scroll down to the notes in this episode, and I will be linking them there. But this year, I am kicking off Kinktober in a special way. I had the opportunity to view the groundbreaking documentary tOuch Kink. And even better, here with me today is the director, producer, and editor, Max Carey. And we are going to be talking about this film and why you need to watch it. And you'll want to, I guarantee it. But a little bit more about the movie. tOuch Kink is a provocative documentary that delves into the hidden world of pleasure, pain, and power through the stories of 4 individuals. Grace, a soccer mom, embarks on a daring journey to awaken her inner dominatrix. I love that. While Mistress Evelyn, a British dominatrix, faces backlash from the tabloid press. Meanwhile, Robin, a Texas kinkster, embraces life as a devoted slave. And January Seraph, the enigmatic muse, unlocks the secret power of kink for those bold enough to explore it. This film offers a raw, intimate look at the depth of human desire and the transformative power of kink, which is something that we have had many, many, many discussions about here. Max, I would love for you to tell my listeners just a little bit more about you before we start talking about this film.
Sure. I love to travel. I love to explore. When I was young, I had the opportunity to start traveling, and I never really got to the end of that. And I discovered by traveling and immersing yourself in different countries or different communities, there was just so much to learn. And doing a movie about kink was sort of visiting kinky land, which has been one of my favorite countries to visit.
Well, and we're going to talk about that now. Folks, you're going to want to listen to this whole episode because if you're already in the world of kink, I think it's going to really resonate with you on a deep, intimate level. If you are curious about kink, well, you may just be ready to dive in by the end of it. And if you feel adverse to the idea of the kink world, my hope is that through this conversation, you will open your mind a little bit and allow yourself to be curious and open to the idea that maybe even you're a little bit kinky. So we will talk about that. I'm ready to dive into this discussion. I'm ready to hear your story and sort of the behind the scenes situation with how this documentary came about and was produced. So let's talk about kink. Cheers.
Let's talk about kink. That
Let's
sounds fun. Cheers.
Coffee.
Always
Kink
good
and
to have
coffee. Kink and coffee. Like
Kink and coffee.
2 of my favorite things. I really want to start with how the concept for this documentary came about, the birth story, if you will.
As I mentioned in my intro, I've had the honor and the luckiness to sort of travel the world, and I've always enjoyed having my ideas changed. I've always enjoyed immersing myself in a culture, especially when it surprised me. And I met a lovely dominatrix by the name of January Seraph. And, being the world traveler I was surprised how surprised I was talking to her. She's very kind, very gentle, very intelligent. And I don't know why, but I had preconceived ideas of what a dominatrix would be. I didn't expect this sort of kindness and this sort of whatever. I expected much of a harshness. And I realized, okay, I have some prejudices here. I really need to explore this. And she talked about the fact that I wasn't alone, that a lot of people kind of, because it's such a dramatic thing, they think of them as one-dimensional characters, and most people don't really know the full richness and beauty of it. So it was her idea to do a documentary, and she, the toughest thing in this community is getting access, getting people to talk to you, and she agreed to vouch for me and introduced me to people, and that's how the journey started. It was really me being surprised that I had certain prejudices, and then at the same time, this wonderful opportunity presented where someone who had access and keys to the kingdom was allowing me a visit inside.
So you weren't kinky beforehand.
Well, I've always been kinky. I didn't realize I was kinky until later in life when I read a book called BDSM 101, and they were talking about what it was to be a dominant. I've always just kind of done what I wanted to do, traveled where I wanted to travel, and kind of just did my life. Couldn't really figure out why most people were complaining all the time because I was just going and doing what I wanted to do, and I've always done that. Then I realized that that was an unusual thing and typically a trait for more dominant people, that they just kind of go do it. I read a book and realized, oh, you're probably a dominant. I was already practicing ethical kink without realizing it because I did like more rough stuff in the bed, shall we say? And but I was making sure I had consent and was talking about these things before and wasn't just making assumptions. And then kink gave me the framework to make that a healthier circle with aftercare and everything else. So I think I've always been hinky. I didn't realize what I was until 20 or 15 years ago. And but then I didn't realize what the whole world was until I started this project. I think I have a better overview of the whole thing now than I would have when I first entered my formally kinky journey too.
When you embarked on this project, was there a purpose? Did you go into it thinking, here's the story I want to tell? Or is that something that developed more clearly over the course of meeting people and interviewing them?
Honestly, the thing I love about documentary work is that you simply get to go to the country and see what happens. I was curious. I can't say I knew how it was going to end. I can't say I knew what was. I mean, when I didn't know one of the characters, Emily, how she was gonna, what was going to happen. But I knew it was something I was very curious about. It was a culture that I wanted to visit, and I thought it was a culture that was largely misunderstood. I just wanted to shed light and try and be as even. There've been a lot of stuff about how crazy people are. I wanted to try and do something that was more compassionate, more honest. No, there was no particular end in mind other than come along with me. I'm going to introduce you to some people I met, and what happens. You know.
So, how did you choose who to follow? How did you choose the characters?
Well, I would never tell a filmmaker to ever do this again. But the truth is, I kind of interviewed everyone who would talk to me. I interviewed something in the neighborhood of 200 and some odd people at different events, and I hoped that arcs would develop and the idea of okay, we're here, something happens, and then we learn something. The vast majority of people I interviewed were very interesting, but there was no arc. There was nothing really happened to them over the course of the year, so I didn't end up using them. So it was a sheer just saying hello to everybody, checking in with everybody. And when people had something happen to them, follow up with them again. And then of the people that something had happened to, follow up with the ones that there was some sort of conclusion to it. Um, Again, I wouldn't recommend this approach. I shot around 600 hours over many years to try and do it this honestly. I think it would be easier to tell a story that's already happened than to start a story and see where it goes.
One more of a comment I'd like to make about the movie is it's beautiful. It's like visually stunning. And I have my own kind of read into that. But I mean, you had to have done that with some level of intention. It was just striking to me. It created a beauty around the subject. Is it just the way you create movies, or was there intention with sort of your visual approach to the subject matter?
Well, we live in a world where people do tend to look at pretty things a little longer than things that aren't pretty, and we're all very visually sophisticated at this point. So I wanted to sort of make it something that maybe it was pretty enough in the way it was shot and looked that you give it a little extra time because sometimes I get that these things are somewhat uncomfortable for some people. And I get that I might need a little bit longer to sort of bring them in. So one of the ways I could bring them in is to make it more visually and audio-wise appealing, just to give me an extra 20 seconds before you click and realize, oh, wait, to get you into the story. So if there was any intention, it was just that. It was just to keep the audience engaged long enough that they were hooked, you know?
Out of the four characters that you followed, was there one that really, I guess, moved you or spoke to you or captivated you? And if so, why?
I guess January maybe because, and that's sort of the least developed because she's more like the background of it. But just because we had such a close relationship and she really wanted this story to be told. I don't know how far you want to get into this, but for various reasons, that became, the beginning, middle, end, and the reason I finished the film, was for her. So I suppose that would be, yeah, if any of them would be January for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love for you to share her story a little bit with my listeners.
Well, I met January, lovely person. She was open. She's a little bit bipolar. So she was up and down when we first met after having our long conversation about she offered to actually even finance the film. And I quickly realized that that was just kind of a little bit of a mania kind of thing. So as much as I appreciated the offer and all that kind of stuff, I wasn't going to take her up on that. But fate would have it, I found another funding source. So we started and we did the film, and she was very passionate about helping me through it and introducing me to all the rest of it. But she did struggle with her manic episodes, and in my mind, her interest in BDSM helped kind of have a very controlled environment. If somebody who a normal person says, "Oh, I'm just not going to see you," or "I'm only going to see you under these conditions," blah blah blah, they might think you're a bit weird. But as a dominatrix, that's like almost exciting, to be very limited with your time and very particular about the way you want to interact. So I think that really helped her. But eventually, unfortunately, she lost her battle with mental health, and unfortunately took her own life. And that happens about a year and a half, a year or so after the completion of the film, and I was paralyzed. I didn't really know what to do. What should I not do the film? I mean, she was my partner in it. Should I? I couldn't figure it out, and other things happened, COVID and personal health issues and all the rest of it. And then one day I woke up and just said, you know what? I'm going to talk to the people that love her. Talk to her sister and talk to her parents and tell and ask them, should I cut her out of the movie completely? Should I? What should I do here? And they saw what I had had at the movie at that time, and she knew that it was really a big important thing for her. And so they gave me permission to sort of go ahead and as long as we didn't make it about that, which was never my intention anyway. So that became the urgency to finish it. Now it was to honor her, to finish it, because it's a ridiculously tough process to make a movie. And so I'm glad that she's sort of the angel on my ear, sort of pushing me to keep doing this and trying to get this out there. Because for me, it's sort of a one-on-one on kink. If you're a little bit curious, this will give you a little bit more information and hopefully provide you with that safe feeling that, okay, maybe I can explore this. I'm not saying you have to be into this, you have to do this, but it is a visit to Kinky Land where you'll sort of see some beautiful people from different walks of life in Kinky Land. And I hope you'll realize that, yeah, some people it was great for, some people not so much, but it's real. And it's a beautiful place. And I believe it's an empowering place.
She pitched it to you. Why was she so passionate about wanting? I mean, she clearly wanted this movie done for a reason, enough to be like, I'll figure out how to get you the money for it, even though that was potentially beyond her means. What was she so passionate about letting the world know about the kink community?
I think she just wanted people to be more open to it, to explore it, to see the beauty of it, to see the fact that I think a lot of people these days are curious how men are supposed to behave or how women are supposed to behave. And the reality is we can all come up with our own rules and we can all come up with our own systems. And I think consent and kink culture is sort of a roadmap forward for society in general. And I think she loved the idea that you can make your life the way you want it without judgment. You can be into what you're into, and you can find this community that should not shame you. You know, nobody's perfect, but for the most part, kinksters aren't going to shame you if you're into X, Y, or Z. They may say, I'm not into X, Y, or Z, but that's cool. So I think she was passionate about the world that she discovered, and also passionate about getting people away from this sort of two-dimensional notion that, oh, dominatrix is always like this, or it's just like a one-dimensional thing. She wanted to show a more in-depth look at these people with the sense that that would, which I believe it did, give it more depth. You see them as two-dimensional. Yeah, you might be a slave by day and an XYZ by night. We're multi-dimensional rich people that Kink can offer a way of us navigating relationships, and really the gospel according to Kink, I guess, wanting to see that get out there, get out into the world.
Right. I think the film did a lovely job of showing how a soccer mom, or, which is a beautiful, like it really worked out well. Your average mom, dad, guy, girl can also have this other side. And it's not as though one side is good and one side is bad. They both just coexist in all of us. We all have different aspects of who we are. I talk a lot on this podcast about how in society we are sort of conditioned to set our sexual selves over here. And that separation of sexual self from whole self is super damaging. And I think that what you see in this movie is how people are able to bring their whole self to the table in a safe space. And I also love how you mentioned that the kink community, and it's also really well outlined in this movie, gives you sort of a capsule for sexual behavior. BDSM can be dangerous, but vanilla sex can be dangerous. And in vanilla sex, we don't talk about consent. We don't talk about aftercare, which should be present in any sex. But in the confines of, the BDSM, the kink church, there is like all of these pieces that the community insists on being honored. So it's beautifully stated. Can you share anything that really surprised you on your own journey into this world? Were there aspects of your own self that developed and changed as you met people, as you learned more?
Absolutely. I usually don't share this actually, but during the making of the documentary, I ended up dating a dominatrix. It was quite famous and quite well known. And at that time, I was still sort of up my own butt a little bit and being the kind of dominant guy. So she surprisingly agreed to be my submissive, my slave, which, when you're kind of topping or dominating such a woman, so it was kind of a bit of a rush. But what it made me realize is that if this person's so comfortable that they're willing to be fluid, what the hell am I? Why am I so up in my own whatever that I have to always be on this side of the slash? So I ended up bottoming to her at one point, which maybe was her evil plan from the whole beginning. I don't know. But it was an
Me.
incredible experience. It was an incredible experience. And I just realized that, once you don't, we also judge ourselves. We also get sort of so stuck in our own whatever that even though we think we're open-minded, maybe we're not that open-minded. When you have a person that you're willing to has this experience, and she had enormous experience and whipping and and dominating men and all the rest of it. I mean, when am I going to get an opportunity to sort of play with someone at this level? So I had a 5-hour session with her, which started with tap, 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 and ended up with bull whips with flesh being ripped off my back, and it still felt like tap, tap, tap. 5 hours later, I mean, I felt wonderful. I was like, never tried heroin, but I assume this is what it's like, what it feels like. It was pure joy. And if it wasn't filmed, I would have probably not believed how the intensity had increased. But she had that sort of mastery of knowing exactly how to kind of build it in such a way that I didn't really feel what was happening, but she kept increasing the pain, but nothing I couldn't take, to the point that it was just this euphoric experience. So I think learning that even when you think you're open-minded, it's good to try both sides of the slash. It's good to be a little more open. I used to make fun of people that were switchy. I think, make up your mind, you're being greedy. But it makes more sense to me. People inspire different things, and you should be open to experimenting because you'll learn. So getting past my own, you know, rigidity and being this dominant guy that was supposed to always be a dominant guy, getting past that a little bit and being a little more open-minded, I think willing to pay was the best thing for me. And the thing that surprised me the most is that I went there, you know.
Did you encounter any kink that surprised you that you weren't aware of before? You were like, wow, it just took you aback.
In a shocking way or just a surprising way? I can't think of anything in a shocking way, but in a surprising way. And it's partly because I'm consulting for different companies right now, but there's this kink called pedal pumping that's incredibly popular. That just blows me away that this is like actually like a super popular video kink that people are buying right now. It basically consists, usually starts with a woman talking about how she has this car that's hard to get started. You don't ever see the woman or the car, but you hear it sort of starting maybe or trying to start. And sometimes you'll see her foot on the gas pedal, and then she's slowly getting the gas pedal going or getting the car revving. And, it might have a money shot of some exhaust shooting out the exhaust pipe at some point, 7 or 8 minutes later. And this is top 100 best-selling like clips in fetish world right now. I never even heard of the thing before.
You mean there's
So
no
that,
nudity? No, it's literally just
in
that.
fact, I've often thought I should shoot it. I mean, you just see a boot. It's usually a boot, and well, it's a woman's voice, but you could do that in AI. Yeah, it's just a voice. I'm guessing it's kind of like some sort of JOI thing for people that are too shy to see nudity. I don't know exactly what. Or the other one is from, which is people in very serious religious garb making out. So whether they be in burqas or they be in traditional Mormon clothing or Hasidic clothing, and it's quite innocent again, but it's just people looking sort of seriously religious, kissing or making out, just being whatever. I mean, those two kinks kind of like never heard of them and was shocked to find out they're like top 100 in the world right now on some of these websites, which is
You made the wrong movie.
yeah, totally, totally. My next movie is going to be pedal pumping from pedal. I don't know.
You launched this movie in 2023, correct? That's when people were started screening it. Can you tell me a little bit about what the reception has been like?
It's been really good. My first screening was at one of the largest festivals in Canada called Fantasia at a sold out audience of 400 people. And it was wonderful. People really, there's always a question and answer after that. So a nice applause and people asking questions, people even crying about how this helped. They've been trying to explain it to their partner. Like they have a particular interest in kink and the partner has always sort of just said to them, nah. And they've been trying to figure out some way to break the ice a little bit. And after this film, a lot of people have said, "Good, it was a really nice intro. It helped me sort of break the ice with my partner," and that's been high praise. Generally, I find it's better received by women because I think women are a little bit more open minded because the film isn't focusing on it's kink in general, talking about an overview kind of thing, but it is a little bit more femdom heavy because those are the people I met. And I think that resonates more with women, and some men maybe feel a little bit threatened by that, which is dominance, doesn't really matter gender, but women tend to find my reviews have been 87% popular or positive with women and, less with men. So generally speaking, been very, very good, especially with women.
Have you had any negative feedback or any pushback?
Yeah, I'm not going to say I didn't. I think everyone is so hungry to be represented. Everybody had said literally 10,000 people signed up to my newsletter looking for a documentary that represented the community in a better way. And a few people criticized that they didn't feel represented. It was like, okay, well, there wasn't enough rope in it, or there wasn't enough Spanko in it. And I'm like, well, I would love the budget to do a 100-part series and cover the top 100 best kinks or kinks in general. But these were the people I met. This is the journey I had. I didn't make anything up. If I had met more rope people, there'd be more rope in it. So some people just kind of, just a hunger to finally see something that represents them and feel that they weren't represented because it is a little bit more about femdom, a little bit more about women. Um, and that was the only thing. It's not a big thing. Most people, even those people, say it's still the kind of thing they'd show to their parents because that was always my ultimate goal. When I was a kid, my parents were too shy to talk about sex, so they handed me a videotape, an old VHS cassette, to sort of explain the birds and the bees. And I'd always partly envisioned this as something to get back to them to explain why kink isn't so scary and kink isn't so dangerous. And a lot of people use it just for that. It's like, mom and dad, watch this, and you'll sort of get a sense of what this is, what this world is, as opposed who are the people in it, rather than being so afraid, you know. So that was always the intention. And I think I accomplished that. But yeah, pushback is always just not being represented, or people have very political things. Some people are more concerned about, like, oh, I don't feel there was any transgender people in it. And I'm like, well, actually, there was several, but I'm not going to label people. I'm not going to go like, oh, there's not people of color, there's not people of transgender. Actually, there was, but I'm not going to label, oh, this person you might not know happens to be trans. I mean, that wasn't the point. If they wanted to describe themselves as that, I would describe them that. But most said, I'm a dominatrix, I'm a slave, I'm a submissive. And that's how they wanted to be identified. That's how I identified them. But people, I think, are a little maybe too political right now, and they want everything to be a message. And I wanted to create something a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more of a 101. So most people are just curious, are getting into it. People are very into a particular kink, are like, oh, I don't feel represented. So a little bit of pushback on that.
I do think that, at least it seemed to me, there was definitely an underlying message of women's empowerment through sexuality, which obviously I'm a fan of. I felt like it was talked about quite a bit. One of the things that stood out in my mind was there's a conversation that takes place about how in the sort of femdom world, it's one of the areas where women getting older doesn't work against them. Let's say that again. It's actually a pro, because you're a pro. The longer you are in this world, the more experience you have. And I think that there was, I think it was said that, like, if you can be 74-year-old dominatrix and have a huge following because they know that you're skilled at what you do. And so I found it really inspiring to talk about a world where it's completely counter to what we experience in our mainstream world that wants to devalue women by their increased sexual experience, devalue women by their increased age, right? Which I think at our core, most women, I just turned 50 this year, and the conversation I keep having with women in my age range is just like, I'm like more confident, more sexual, more like I feel more sexy when I go out, when I do things. Because I think our inside world is at odds with the outside conventional world. And so the kink world tends to really like embrace that women's empowerment and sexuality and what we have to offer. And it did seem to be, at least at the underlying kind of message, or at the core of the messaging in the documentary. And I also feel like it aligns with the times, at least my listeners. I have a lot of you reaching out about femdoms. I think there's a growing interest from men, like, who want to be released from the chains of conventional roles, who love the idea of having a woman just like step up and take control sexually so they can like step out of this role they've been forced into. Did you do that intentionally, or did it just kind of happen because of the stories that you picked up?
I think it both. I wanted to focus more on women and empowerment of women, because I get kink is controversial enough. God forbid I just do it about, you know, men dominating women or something. I might as well just sort of shoot myself in the head right now. You know, it has to be I did that intentionally, but for me, it was more about trying to get the framework. If people remember one thing about the film, and the reason I have the big O in the middle of tOuch, is this circular process of just being open, just talking and not feeling shame. I can say, okay, I really would like you to dominate me, or I really would like this, I would like that. Just getting past the shame and having open and honest conversations with your partner. You know, and then of course these things come to light where people want to try different things, and they'll be more open and get out of this sort of, oh, I'm the football star, I can't do this, you know. Just be more honest with yourself, and then getting that consent and playing in that way, and then following up and seeing how that was. It's you know, continuing that circle of experimentation and letting yourself get more and more open and more trusting and more cared for. And I think we just gravitate more naturally to where we're supposed to be that way. And we get past this sort of bullshit that's been, one of the greatest things I learned from traveling is not everywhere thinks the same. There are places that are sort of largely matriarchal cultures. There are cultures that are more socialist. There are cultures that are more right. There is no one handed down from the universe way of living. We make up the rules. And as we move into this modern age, I think it's important that we're open to that and have those honest conversations. And, I think it's going to work out that 50% of the time, you're probably going to want a woman in charge, and 50% of the time, you're probably going to want a man in charge. It's not, I don't even know that it's actually about gender, to be honest. I think it's just about people. But yeah, it was more about providing that circle and that safety and making a safe space for both men and women to find what they're looking for and in an open way and experiment in a healthy way and give it that roadmap. That's the worst part about, my generation. We had a set of rules. My dad tried to tell me a set of rules, and those rules are all gone. And this generation didn't really get a new set of rules yet. I haven't seen the rule book yet, at least. So I think the rule now the thing is, well, it depends on what you and I want to do, or you and, you two people want to do, and they work that out for themselves. And even if we'd agree to one thing doesn't mean that works for everybody else. So maybe that's the way forward. And Kink really offers that for all genders and frees women to be who they really want and want what they really want, and frees men to, the downside of being men sometimes is they don't really have the emotional spectrum also. Men, I've heard it described that men for the most part are basically allowed to get angry and slightly pleased with themselves. That's kind of the emotional spectrum of men. So poor men also need to find ways of being more vulnerable, ways of finding different things, and they have to trust, people, feminine, or maybe it's even same sex, it doesn't really matter. But I always think that there's like feminine energy and masculine energy more than genetics. That feminine sort of healing energy versus that masculine sort of naturally kind of maybe protecting energy, rather than actual biological gender. But both have very useful purposes,
Right.
and we all have both of those things. So I think I'm less about biological gender, but just more about understanding that everything's a spectrum, and we should just find these safe spaces to have honest conversations and not worry that we're going to be judged. And that's the thing I love the most about the kink community. You go to a kinky munch and you say, hey, I really like X, Y, and Z. Somebody might be into X, Y, and Z, and they might be into X, Y, and Z with you,
You traveled all over to do the filming, and so you chose people in different places. Did you find that some locations were just more open-minded? Like, I know you went to Oregon and you went, did you find that some places where you went to film were like, oh, this area of the world is more conducive and friendly to kink communities, and this environment over here, location, wow, it's totally different than when I was in Oregon?
I guess it depends on how you want to define that. Certainly in a place like California, it's more on the sleeve. You can have those conversations a little bit more. Yet the kink scene's about the same. You go to the East Coast, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, these places. It's more underground, but it's the same size. I think it's the only difference really is how open they're going to be about it, how public or how private they are. I think the exact percentage of people that are kinky everywhere and have this interest in this drive is probably exactly the same almost everywhere, but it's a question of style. And in some places they might, I've talked to young people, and it's amazing the conversations in high school right now. People are all polyamorous and gender fluidity and kind of have this wonderful sort of bringing. I probably was that too, but I didn't have those words. There's this wonderful, because you can have that conversation. There isn't that, oh, you have to be straight and you have to have a girlfriend, So I think having those conversations is a great way to start. But to answer your question more directly, I think that the world is pretty kinky. They have different kinks, but it has the same percentage everywhere. It's more of a factor of education, I think. The more educational on average, the more kinky on average people are. And then it's just a question of how public or private they are, and that's more to do with general society. And they have different kinks. Different places definitely have different kink priorities, different kink interests.
Like, give me an example.
Well, the British, I think, grew up, especially the people, the older generation, grew up a lot with corporal punishment. So they love still caning and whipping and paddling, where the Californians don't have any idea, haven't had corporal punishment for forever, and it's just not a big thing. In the Muslim world, there's a lot. I think they grow up at the feet of young men. Their first thing they see when they're hitting their age is the women's feet or the beautiful black hair. Guess what? They have big fetishes for hair and feet. American men, maybe we're looking at Playboy, and of course we have big fetishes for boobs. It's I think what's going on in the culture around the time that you're starting to have your first desire often forms our first fetishes. We still everyone's got them, but that's sort of the cultural influence, I believe, is when what's happening around you in those formative years. What are you seeing? If you're looking at Playboys, you're going to like this. If you're looking at that, you're probably going to like that. I think it's something, a connection around that time. But I think we all form those kinks and those interests around that time. And it's funny, man. I always laugh. You just hear a man say, "Oh, I'm not kinky." He says, "Well, are you a boob man, or are you like legs? You like butts?" He says, "Oh, I've always loved women's legs." Well, guess what? You're a fetishist. You just have a relatively common fetish, but that's a kink, okay? There's no difference between someone who likes legs and someone who likes feet. It's just maybe a less common kink. And then realizing we all have those things for whatever reason. We like eyes, we like a conversation, there's whatever we like, there's something that is particularly hot for us that formed at a relatively early age, and most of the time that will stay with us as a primary kink.
And it was in this film, I think there were conversations around how some people think that they're vanilla, but then when you go into their houses or when you really talk about them, they've got the pink fuzzy handcuffs and they've got the blindfolds and it's like that's not exactly vanilla, but then what comes into play, I think, is all of that messaging that's like that you can do that much. But if you go further, then you're strange. Then something's like wrong with you. I think also in the film, you did do a wonderful job of covering sort of historically what BDSM, it was classified as as a mental emotional disorder.
Up until 2003, I believe it was still considered a mental illness.
Yes.
Well, being gay was a mental illness till 1967, I believe.
Yeah, so you can see the evolution in the film. And the assumption is, in my mind, that we will just keep evolving and realizing sort of the ridiculousness of the purity culture that's been prevalent, right? I also wondered if the way this film ended up cultivating and being released, it seems to be in stride with a very quickly growing interest by the general population in kink. Kink is actually becoming more mainstream, I would argue, by the moment, by the day, by the month, by the year, as is non-monogamy and alternate relationship lifestyles, right?
Absolutely.
Is this something you saw, and is it part of why you thought moving forward with the movie would be good?
Absolutely. And I think these things come in wave. I think the crest of the last wave was probably 50 Shades of Grey. And it's actually, but I mean, it goes up and goes down, goes up, but it gets stronger each time as the wave goes. I think for the most part, we're at sort of the bottom of the wave right now, but it is building. The interest is always there. That's as society changes. And ideas get introduced, they get accepted, maybe they get pushed back a little bit, then they get adjusted and then accepted again and then go forward. And, this is just how public discourse works. So yeah, I was hoping to catch that wave at the right time for sure. I do believe it that people open and their minds open and close depending on what the political winds and what's happening in our lives. Obviously, if we're all suffering economically or there's terrible things going on, we tend to get into our shells like little turtles and we just deal with what we have to deal with. As we get in a position in time to be more introspective and to look at these things. These things are a luxury, important one, but we have to be in a political and emotional space to be ready to be open to these things. So yeah, I hope to catch it. I was hoping to be in that. I am finding surprising amount of pushback in the States with broadcasters. I got a broadcaster in Germany, in Italy, Israel. Europeans seem to really like it's part of the thing. A lot of American festivals and broadcasters, I think it was too edgy for them. So that's why I'm doing the
Wow.
kinema thing for them. Yeah, yeah. I think they don't know what to do with it, and I think after COVID, there wasn't that many broadcasters left, so everyone's playing it safe, and buying a movie about kink for your platform might not be the safest choice when there's another Marvel movie to buy. Uh, I think they're just playing it safe for right now, but the Europeans certainly get it and enjoy it. I'm getting a wonderful interest. That's why I'm doing these podcasts. I get people sent my newsletter. I let them know the next screening, and I'm always selling these screenings out. Now people are actually doing their own screenings all over the world of the film to try and get the word out. And it's going quite well. And I think, once the final numbers come in, the broadcaster's probably going to wish that they had a bigger piece of it because it is a grassroots thing. It's the beginning of something. It's nobody, 30 years ago, nobody was catering to the gay market. Now it seems like every other film, it'll 30 years from now, people will cater to it more directly. I think they're indirectly been catering to it for a long time, but more directly catering to a kinky market as things go, because it's bigger. I mean, obviously kinky people can be of all orientations, but kink's bigger than all of it.
I did notice in the movie, it really, it does contrast sort of the 50 Shades of Grey. Love it or hate it, it did help expose mainstream people to the world of kink. And a lot of women specifically got real turned on to it and interested. Now, the kink community, I think, was frustrated by it for many, many reasons. And it's because it really did connect to the main character, who was the kinkster in the beginning, to being, mentally, emotionally troubled. And there was that tie. And also, if you're someone who's done kink for any amount of time, the woman who wrote it's just terrible writer, and didn't represent it well, but it did do favors to the mainstreaming and acceptance of kink. But this film does a beautiful job of, I think, resetting the conversation where it can be palatable and even enticing to mainstream folks without doing a disservice to the actual true experience, which would be my argument for why, in celebration of Kinktober, or if you're listening to this later on in the year, why you should watch it if you're curious, or even if you're not even curious, you're anti the idea of it. You might want to just give it a little taste, because most likely when you are taking care of yourself at night, you're thinking about something kinky. So why not open your mind to it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the stories I wish I documented, I only found out about it later, was a couple that had, married when they were very young. He was the quarterback, she was the cheerleader, and, they first love, got married 2-3 years later, they divorced. 20 years later, they meet up at a kink event. And they sit down and have a conversation. Turns out he was the quarterback, all the rest, but he really wanted to be a slave. He wanted to be submissive, but he was just afraid to tell his wife. He thought she would judge him and might as well, whatever. So he never, rather than have the conversation, he just, this isn't working. Guess what? She also wanted to be more dominant and wanted to whatever, but she felt, I'm supposed to be the good American girl. So she didn't feel comfortable having that conversation. They found out they're perfect for each other. They've been together and happily remarried ever since. Why did these people lose 20 years? Because they were afraid to have an honest conversation. And I hope that's what this does, is make it okay to say, yeah, okay, I'm going to be honest with you. I like to whatever, I like X, Y, and Z. Hope you're not going to judge me and think that's weird, but I'm going to at least be honest with you. I don't necessarily have to do X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to be open. That's an honest thing. And feel comfortable enough to say it, because you might be rewarded. Well, you will be rewarded ultimately.
I love that you say that. I think watching this film with your partner would be wonderful. I have recently been intimacy coaching. I have several clients, and I also have people reach out to me all the time. And one of the things that's really struck me, because it's never been an issue in my life, is how many people aren't having honest conversations with their life partners about sex. They can't talk to them about sex. It's incredibly common, and it causes so much strife in a relationship and personal Like if you want to talk about emotional internal conflict and, mental health issues, when you can't talk to the person you're having sex with about what you want because you're afraid they might leave you, that creates such an unpleasant inner world. So I love the fact that you bring up that hopefully this will help people start having honest conversations with their partner. If you are going to be having sex with anybody, I don't care, one night stand, someone you just started dating, your wife, your, whoever, life partner, you need to be able to have honest conversations about sex. Or you will live in a
Absolutely.
cage, and not the fun, kinky kind of cage, for the rest of your life, right?
It's more than sex even. It's just sensation and connection too. Maybe, you're not, for whatever reason, able to have classic intercourse. Maybe there's other things that you want to play with and other sensations you want to achieve. And it's a way to have those conversations too. Maybe you just like a good spanking for whatever reason. That wakes you up in the morning. I wonderful Belgian movie called S.M. Richter, which is a true story of a judge that got into S&M to help his wife beat depression. And, her getting spanked on a fairly regular basis helped her get out of depression. She needed that stimulation more than anything else, and it just helped her. It was better than medication. It was the single best thing that she found, and it was, by all accounts, super healthy. Of course, it's a sad story because him being a judge and the world finding out didn't work out so well for him, but it's a true story, and it's a sort of a beautiful, bittersweet story of them being a happier couple than they ever were, and her working through her depression through the sensation of having impact play more than sex, but it changing her life.
So I guess my last question to you would be is if you were ever to do a follow-up or follow this up with another kinky film, what would your next step be in telling the story?
Well, actually, I'm working on a series right now, 10-part episode, with any luck, and be on Netflix in a couple of years. And I'm calling it Modern Love. And I want to do 10 episodes on different aspects of the kink community. It's funny because there's subgroups in the kink community that don't necessarily consider themselves kinky. They're just into spanking, for example, or they're just into rope, for example, or they're just into going to parties and wearing latex, or they don't really necessarily think of themselves as kinky. They just have this other little thing that they like, and they can, in their world, that's normal. And by all accounts, it is kink to me, but there is interesting lessons in it all. And seeing those people, and I would love to just focus on, do one episode per, the top 10, latex, spanking, BDSM, rope, a few others, just the top 10 sort of most common things that there's whole communities around, and go more in depth just on one kink and the language of it and why they do it. I mean, I remember going to a spanking event once and seeing 10 couples doing the spanking, and it just struck me that every one of those people, although it looks exactly the same, is having a completely unique experience. Some are having pleasure from it, some pain, some it might be a dominant having their sub do it, some might be, who knows, but you can't tell by looking, but I know those stories are interesting. And I think there's always so much with the old cliche, right? There's more to a book than its cover. And I would love to do a 10-part series sort of illustrating there's more to a kink than what you see at first glance.
I love it. Well, we'll have to keep our eye out for that. Can you tell my listeners for now, like where they can watch your film, how they can find information out about you and tOuch Kink?
tOuchKink.com. Go to tOuchKink.com. You can see the trailer, sign up for the newsletter. I usually have it geolocated, so I'll send out notices for screenings in your area. Some are virtual screenings, some are real life screenings. Some in European countries, it'll be on TV. But yeah, just sign up, go to tOuchKink.com, put your name in for the newsletter, and you'll get information.
Perfect. And of course, I will put the links below. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to watch the film and talk to you about it. I think it's a wonderful way to kick off the month. And it's also a wonderful way to help my listeners find their way on their own journey through their sex lives, and hopefully maybe into at least tasting kink. So until next time, listeners, I will see you in the locker room. Cheers.